I'm Taiwo, and this is Medical Experts in Football.
Components of working with a high-level population at first was this ingrained idea in my head, which exists in a lot of our heads, that when you look at a professional athlete, if you just look at them aesthetically from afar, you see several commonalities. You see, rippling muscles, oftentimes a large bank account. You oftentimes see an attractive, rich, successful, muscular person. And the next logical thought in your head is, but look how physically impressive they are. They must also be mentally impressive.
That's certified mental performance consultant, Greg Chertok.
What's a favorite sports pastime as a child?
It was baseball. I mean, I grew up with a twin brother. I played throughout high school and college. And, it was actually my experiences in baseball that triggered an interest in the field of sports psychology. I mean, I was a good player, but I was such a mental player. In other words, I'd get in my own way so often.
And how did you realize that at such a young age?
At a young age, it just felt like uncomfortable nerves before the game or intensely hard on myself when things didn't go really well. It wasn't like an existential or deeply philosophical realization. It was more like my stomach hurts and I don't want to play right now. I didn't get a hit today, and therefore I'm done with baseball forever. It was more kind of pediatric. But I think as I evolved and grew, I began to really realize that on one day I could be feeling highly focused and positive and with my goals clear in mind and wanting the action and physically feeling great. And on the next day, inexplicably feeling really crappy and tired and intensely focused on, it was the same Greg, but a very different way that I was thinking about baseball. I think that really triggered an interest for me.
Did that, Greg, translate during your college days too? Did you feel like you still really struggled with that?
Yeah, I think I got more of a handle on it as I aged, and just naturally as my brain developed and I think my understanding of myself developed, I was able to breathe through some of the anxiety or sing away some of my my bad focus just in a distracted way. But I think I turned to very superficial strategies of helping myself. There's certainly nothing against singing or deep breathing, but those are very on the surface ways of helping yourself. There wasn't anything deeper and more kind of like self-examining than that. Even in college, I mean, I still felt my 12-year-old self emerging at times, just desperate to not get the ball hit to me, or somewhat relieved if like my name wasn't called as a starter. Which on the surface, I was like an all-star in my respective conference, but I didn't feel like I had it together at all.
I can totally relate because sometimes it's like you start a game and I'm like, don't pass me the ball. I'm going to screw up. Don't do it.
And those are the games where you get the most action, isn't it? It always
Right. And then they end up passing you the ball and you're like, wow, great. So you knew at an early age, what was your thought process? Because you went and got your bachelor's in psychology and then you went straight to get a master's of education in sports psychology. Was it necessary to get your bachelor's in psychology to do what you're doing today, which we'll get to?
I always had this natural interest in human behavior, and I just like when I was 7, I wanted to be an astronomer, and that idea dissipated. And then I wanted to be a professional baseball player, and that became unrealistic. So I think at some point, as I was growing, the idea of going into psychology was an attractive idea. Just being able to talk to somebody and emote with them and try to help them through some barriers. And I think when I realized in high school that there was such a thing as sports psychology, like I was able to marry these two interests of mine. It was possible to go into the psychology of sport and performance.
So you are a certified mental performance consultant today. What's a day like for you?
I think it differs based on the kind of professional you are. And I think I knew this pretty early on. I wanted to be more applied and actually consulting with athletes. So on any given day, I will work with between 5 and maybe 15 athletes. And when I say athletes, I actually even mean that in a more loose sense, in that maybe 75% of my clients are high school or college or professional or Olympic level athletes, not only in the kind of 4 or 5 major sports that we think of when we associate in major athletics, but combat sports or even dog agility, like the kind of stuff that you see in Westminster. So I'm working with individuals who are in a position of performance in which they've got a lot of demands placed on them to perform well amid a slew of distractions, whether it's parental distractions or the pressure to perform well, or they're transitioning to the next level and are pursuing a scholarship or a professional contract. And When we're kind of walking on our journey toward this desired outcome, there are always these roadblocks in our way, some that we create ourselves and some that are externally created. And so my job is to assist these athletes and performers in kind of identifying what those are and
Mhm.
identifying strategies to kind of combat that. And a lot of that involves self-awareness and the general awareness of our bodies and minds, the ability to set the right kind of goals, the ability to relax in response to performance anxiety, to block out distractions. You don't have to be just a soccer player or just an athlete to need those kind of mental skills to be successful at your job.
I mean, every individual is going to vary based on their needs, but can you just break down maybe like what a session is like from maybe the typical time frame? What do you have them doing first? Is there like pattern to the meetings that each athlete has with you?
There are certain formulas as far as like how I may connect with an athlete, but when it comes to the ways that I intervene with them or the kind of strategies I give, there isn't really much formula behind that. I think a lot of it is determined by the way they're presenting to me or their needs. Earlier on today, I met with a high school soccer player who suffered her second ACL repair and is like slowly beginning to return to play, and there's some qualms about that. And I spoke with a high school or a college level tennis player who just wants to talk performance based stuff. So I think we'll take the injured athlete. Seems to be a sizable percentage of my clientele these days. And if we're to look at the identity of an injured athlete who, without their consent, kind of had their athletic identity ripped away from them beyond their control in some kind of sometimes very scary and traumatic physical injury, they've gone from, in one moment of their lives, healthy and successful and lots of attention, to pretty much overnight feeling crippled and sidelined and kind of craning their neck out onto the action where all of their healthy, functional teammates are still performing and enjoying all the social and physical benefits of playing, and they're surrounded by crutches or braces. And that, not only from a physical standpoint, but just from a psycho emotional standpoint, is very difficult, especially for someone between the age of 14 and 20 who might not be all that inclined to talk through or process the way that they're feeling. Oftentimes athletes are, from a very young age, whether it's familially or from their sport, have been taught, and not that this is necessarily the wrong approach to life, but if you're dealing with something, find some dirt, just throw it on it and move on. We don't have to stop too long to complain or whine about our problems. Let's move on. We're seeking high performance here. There's no time for complaining and moaning and groaning. So a lot of the athletes I'm working with are almost sheepish to even admit any vulnerability. They'll maybe come in with the posture of, yeah, I've been dealing with this, but I'm fine. Everything's going to be great. My mom says, just like, keep a positive attitude. Or my coach says, keep looking forward. These kind of ESPN interviewish sorts of answers that sound great, but if we're looking at the kind of trauma that's associated with being sidelined from this thing that was the most important part of my life, it requires some conversations. So I think the formula in connecting, at least for an injured athlete, normalize the presence of how burdenful, how burdensome and challenging it is to go through what they're going through. Oftentimes, before any kind of work or like mental skills are dispensed to them, they have to be softened into the relationship. And a lot of them are coming in literally, posturally, cross-armed. But you don't have to be a psychologist to kind of feel the resistance when somebody comes into a session, crossing their arms or crossing their legs and saying, well, mom told me to do this, or dad forced me into this. So there needs to be some rapport built.
Yeah. How do you break through to get them to expose that vulnerability?
If I'm a fly on the wall watching how the normal junior level athlete, even professional level athlete, is interacted with by the parents and mentors and coaches and trainers and people around them, I think in a very well-intended way, many people who are providing a service to an athlete, the surgeons and doctors and PTs and athletic trainers, are doing a lot of advice dispensing. They're giving a lot of advice to athletes, and athletes spend a lot of their time looking and nodding and listening obediently to people telling them how to live their life. And that's fine in doses, but I mean, I'm sure you know the extent to which an athlete, when they're holding on to 85.3 million bits of advice and counsel from people in their life, it's hard to carry all that. It's uncommon, and I'm shocked. But I suppose this is why my intervention is successful. I'm shocked at how infrequently a lot of athletes are given the opportunity to do the talking and to have someone listen to them. And I think when it comes to establishing rapport, I do way less advice dispensing at least at first. No one's willing to listen to advice from someone they don't trust. I do way less advice dispensing and way more question asking. You can even think, as can I, if a friend of yours were to come up to you and say, "I'm feeling so angry, I'm so stressed right now," our reflex would be to say, "Oh, relax, calm down, it's going to be okay, don't worry." Like, our reflex is to dispense advice in a well-intended way.
Mhm.
But that's way less effective than being like, "Oh, that must be so hard to tell me more about that." And that alone, the kind of invitation to share more. I'm crafting myself as somebody who's genuinely interested in hearing about your experience. So let me sit back and ask you questions about that. That's very rapport building.
Now, there are going to be a number of medical professionals, whether that's athletic trainers, physical therapists, that will be tuning in. What are ways that, even as medical professionals, maybe that we can communicate, even if it's something that we want to tell the athlete, but still come across as, hey, athlete, you have the floor. I want to help you.
If we're looking at some of the very general theoretical understandings of human motivation, one of the one of these underpinning theories that really guides the way I practice is called the self-determination theory. What that states is that in order for an athlete or anyone to be really fully intrinsically motivated at doing anything, at being a father, a husband, a professional, an athlete, a mother, etc., there are three psychological criteria have to be fulfilled. We have to feel competent, autonomous, and we have to feel related. I have to feel competent. In other words, I need to feel as though I'm good at what I'm doing. I've got the ability to be even better at it, that I'm excited about the challenges ahead of me, that I'm viewing the tough moments as like opportunities for growth. That's competence. To be autonomous means to feel like I'm acting according to my own volition. Like I'm in charge of the direction in which I'm aiming my life. I get a say in what I do and the choices I make. And related means that I feel like I'm a part of a loving, nurturing, warm, supportive family, team, community, etc. When those three criteria are met, and I'm sure that we can all think of our own families and jobs, where I feel like I'm good at what I'm doing, I feel like I have say in the way that I'm living my life, and when I feel like I'm surrounded by people whose values are aligned with mine and are loving and positive, I'm excited to go do that thing.
Mhm.
And so I would suggest to medical professionals as a very loose guideline to consider every conversation with an athlete with those three questions in mind. What can I do to satisfy their level of competence, their level of autonomy, and their relatedness? How can I create like a loving, warm, inviting, nurturing environment? If I'm trying to encourage you to exercise, there's a difference between saying, I think it's really important for you to walk 5 miles a day, versus exercise is really important and will lead to a lot of health. What are some of the ways that you think you're willing to enter into exercise? When I give you choice, it empowers you to feel like you have some ownership over the process. So how can we empower our athletes to maybe create some ownership as far as anything related to their rehab or their recovery? Then how can I help them develop confidence, which is noticing that they're maybe making growth and progress and the encouragement of doing more of that?
Now, for you during your early years, what is something that you wish you heard 3, 5 years out before you started working with higher level athletes when it comes to just what you talked about? What's something you wish you knew?
I suppose a lot of us, when we begin our career, we visualize this like very sexy end goal of, I want to work with professional athletes, or I want to be a professional athlete. And oftentimes like the reality of achieving that thing is occasionally less sexy than our minds convince us it's going to be. And as a former professional athlete, I'm sure you can recall moments that were less attractive than your mind told you it was going to be. I think that working in professional sports has been no more meaningful to me than working with a really motivated 12-year-old or like a high level junior athlete who's really engaged in the process. Oftentimes, working with a higher level athlete, there come distractions and other things that kind of complicate the relationship itself. Scheduling becomes hard, and there are a lot of people involved in the process. I wouldn't say that the most meaningful work I've done has been in pro sport. So when I'm talking to an aspiring professional, I try and temper that desire and tell them there's so many other areas of counseling and sports psychology that can be really fulfilling rather than just working in pro sport, where we're kind of envisioning being on the sideline, the coaches, and giving this life-changing advice in the moment, which isn't really how sports psychology always works. I think as it relates to those three components of the self-determination theory, which I suppose when I'm even sharing them with you, it seems like simple and formulaic, just satisfy their autonomy and competence and relatedness, and and all their dreams will come true. But all of those require a process. That an athlete who's feeling a severe lack of confidence, especially an injured athlete who's not playing, should be expected to be really feeling a hit to their self-esteem. That helping them notice the areas of competence that they're in which they're currently living is tough, especially when a lot of them have the mindset of I just want to be playing again. I want to be away from this. This is uncomfortable. I don't feel like I'm healthy or productive. I want to be on the field. Helping them settle into where they are and accept where they are is very challenging. So I would say the developing of rapport isn't like a 1 hour long phenomenon that then drastically improves after one conversation. It could require some dedication on the counselor's end to really lean into the process.
So are there some athletes that you may see for months on months?
There are some athletes, very few, who I'll see once or twice, and some I would say, a handful who I've worked with for 7 or 8 years. On average, though, the relationship lasts for I would say several months. I guess we can call that months on months. The intervention is intended to be short term, but I feel like in our quest for high performance for a lot of athletes or generally performers, that path is oftentimes very lonely and isolating. And to have someone who's there to share, and it's not like I'm only asking questions, I'm also dispensing valuable advice, that somebody who's there to listen and offer a fresh outside perspective and advice, that's very welcomed. And I feel like athletes will kind of latch onto our relationship.
Are your meetings typically all in person, or can you do like Zoom calls or phone meetings? Do you prefer a typical setting?
Well, COVID has really altered the business model, I think, in a lot of businesses. For mine, over the last year, I've been maybe 98% virtual, which I think adds a level of convenience because the athletes I work with are not only based in the Rockland County area, but most are all over the country
Mhm.
and some all over the world.
So before the pandemic, though, were people flying in?
That too was done virtually. I would say that pre-pandemic, my practice was maybe 60% virtual and 40% in person, and now it's 98%
Yeah.
virtual.
You mentioned before that you find equal fulfillment working with high school athletes, professional athletes, no difference. Just working with each population. Is there something that you notice more so within professional athletes? Yes, obviously they're professionals, they're making probably a lot more money. Are there like certain characteristics maybe that seem to be so prominent in one population versus another?
But particularly of a professional level athlete, there is this oftentimes healthy, but at times obsessively and unhealthy desire for perfection. And I could see how that quality can lead an athlete who's striving for the supreme level of greatness to work their butt off and to be super prepared and to be chiseled muscularly and to leave no stone unturned. But that same quality can kind of keep you up at 2 a.m., like wondering why I didn't make that perfect pass or what the hell was I thinking taking that shot. The desire for perfection can propel us to very high levels of ascension, but it can also cripple us not if, but when perfection isn't achieved. So that tends to be a common personality trait among higher level athletes. And this couldn't have been said 10 or 15 years ago, but there's a much greater openness to working with someone like me. Even when I started in the field 15 years ago, there is, and still to this day, granted, a reluctance to work with like a shrink, or does it mean that I'm broken? Like, is he going to have me lie on a couch, reveal my innermost childhood fears? So I think there's this image of the psychologist as like the fixer of my broken parts, and I'm going to have to get really deep into my traumatic upbringing. Most high level athletes are of the mindset of whatever works. If this is going to help me, I'm willing to give it a shot. So there's definitely an openness to talking with someone like me, even if it's beyond their comfort zone, because they're able to notice that down the road this can be facilitated.
So even for those that like are perfectionists, say we're talking about then a Kobe Bryant who's like has to have everything right. Even then, they kind of just say if you said, "Hey, chill out for like the night and not do anything," they actually took that into consideration?
I also have to be able to take the temperature of the athletes I'm working with. In other words, if I'm working with a rigid perfectionist, if the advice I have for them is like, well, just like, calm down a little bit, take the night off, probably wouldn't be met like all that well. Seemed like a really relatable bit of advice, and I'm aware of that. Let's say for a perfectionist, as an example, we have to be very clear. I think generally as performers, what is in our control and what's beyond our control. And I think oftentimes the danger of perfectionism is that we're demanding perfection or high levels of performance in things that we may not ultimately have all that much control in. Like I can't control winning all the time or scoring a hat trick or getting 5 hits today. There are so many factors at play that may prevent that from happening. So I think when our perfectionism causes us to shine the light of our attention on some level of performance that really isn't only contingent on me. That leads to some helplessness and anxiety.
Yeah.
Going into a game saying, I have to get a hit every time I'm up is very anxiety producing. But there are certain things that I can control for that I can be perfect in. I can control preparing perfectly for this at-bat, or having a perfect level of focus, or talking to myself in the perfect way, or breathing perfectly, or making sure my stance is exactly where I want it to be. So I think when that perfectionism is redirected onto areas that we actually can ensure happen, that becomes more empowering. And I think that would be a bit of advice just with the perfectionism. Not like throw away this quality, let it go, which nobody responds well to you telling them to reject a part of themselves, but rather, I love this quality, but can we see how it's possibly leading to some unhealthy stuff? Let's channel that quality of yours, which I want you to hold on to, but in more meaningful ways, in ways that are actually going to help you perform.
Now, I know you're not like a high school athlete, but I'm sure you're still an athlete in your own right. How do you apply that principle to maybe in your life today? Do you find yourself kind of going back to some of the things that you use to help the athletes?
That definitely is, and this is a secondary or maybe even tertiary benefit of my job. I definitely didn't go into this for selfish reasons, but selfishly, when I'm speaking with an athlete and I'm giving advice or I'm listening or we're coming to some conclusion, I might be vocalizing it to him or to her, but I'm hearing it myself. I'm being benefited with the kind of reminders I'm offering to them, hearing it and feeling it freshly myself. So, if I'm spending several hours multiple hours a day talking about, the importance of being kind to yourself or setting a certain kind of goal or being intentional with your focus or being a good leader or communicator, it's making it more likely that those qualities really stay ingrained within me. What a lot of parents feel also when they're giving advice to their children, it helps them live in a similar way because you're teaching it to others, but also kind of reminding yourself of that thing too.
And you mentioned kindness. Why is it so hard for us as humans to truly be kind to ourselves?
At least in part, and this definitely is a cultural thing. Not every culture disseminates the same kind of messaging. We could look no farther than a Pee Wee or Pop Warner or Little League environment, and just like take out your notepad and your pen and document some notes on what that environment is like. And what you'll see is, as an example, let's say 5-year-old Timmy has just missed a kick. He's tried his hardest, but he missed like an easy goal. All you have to do is crane your neck and look at the sideline, at the coaches and at the parents, and look no further than like the response to imperfection to see where kids begin getting the messages of, so it actually doesn't matter what my attitude is like or how hard I've worked. It really, all that matters is the outcome. Is that what you're saying? So when a 5-year-old is getting messages like that, it becomes confusing, especially when that coach or that adult has said before the game, just try your best, have fun. But when they're giving frustrated glances because I didn't score my third goal today, or I popped out on that ball I should have crushed,
Yeah.
that becomes problematic, and that begins to ingrain this idea that if I don't do well, the most important adults in my life are showing frustration and disappointment. I suppose I should do that too. I shouldn't be happy when I do poorly.
Like, I know you said that you work with all types of athletes, but I know that there also may be someone who wants to work specifically with professional athletes. First, how many years of experience did you kind of obtain before you even started working with professional athletes? And what was the toughest aspect when you first were even communicating what you thought they should do during those early years?
I remember my advisor from graduate school had said, when you're looking to grow yourself in the field, just focus on doing good work and then see what happens. And I would say that for the first 5 or 6 years in my practice, I was really just focused on doing great work with the clients that I was working with. I wasn't demanding a certain level of performance from my clients. I was doing meaningful work and the connections built and networking grew. And I would say within 5 or 6 years of my consulting practice, I began getting introduced to higher level coaches or trainers or agents who then felt trusting enough to let me into their corner and be a resource for their athlete. one of the most difficult components of working with a high level population at first was this ingrained idea in my head, which exists in a lot of our heads, that when you look at a professional athlete, if you just look at them aesthetically from afar, you see several commonalities. You see, rippling muscles, oftentimes a large bank account. You oftentimes see an attractive, rich, successful, muscular person. And the next logical thought in your head is, but look how physically impressive they are. They must also be mentally impressive. We kind of equate physical impressiveness as a valid and reliable indicator of mental impressiveness. And I think that was a barrier assumed shouldn't even be working with me. They must have the most confidence in the world. And I made these very gross assumptions about who I'm working with, when after just a few moments of conversation revealed the presence of doubt and fear and nerves and insecurity as it relates to all of us. So I definitely held on. And even still today, 15 years in, I'll work with an athlete who on the surface seems like, well, they're the exception. This one must have it all going on. And I convince myself, well, this athlete has nothing wrong with them or needs no intervention or has everything figured out. And I laugh because everyone's dealing with something.
So how many hours are you working a week? And I'm sure you probably don't even consider it work, but.
And that's a good distinction, because I do reflect on the week once the week is done. And I oftentimes feel more energized and invigorated after a long week of work, because I really do consider it a passion. I consider it a source of excitement. I know my wife, who's in education, and who also is passionate about education, I think doesn't have the same relationship with her job. I think sometimes she feels like the 35-pound weight on her shoulders as she's lugging out the door. Whereas I feel like the clicking of my heels as I'm about to begin my day, which I know is a big luxury. So right, it doesn't feel much like work. But I would say on any given week, I'm working with between 30 and 45 athletes per week.
Does your wife enjoy when you give her advice, or do you just refrain from that?
Sometimes she does, and I think we have a good enough communication style where when she's entering into telling me about something, I'll make sure to know beforehand, like, am I just to listen, or would you like my help with this? Because I think the natural instinct, I'm not going to genderize this, but I think the natural instinct of a lot of people is to quickly fix things when the other party just wants them to shut up and listen.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes my wife embraces my help, and sometimes she says, "Don't use your sports psychology stuff on me. Just quiet down and listen to me."
And then lastly, you've done a number of appearances, whether that's online, for ESPN, NPR. How did you even get involved in that? It seems like you even have an interest of even writing.
And I think it really goes back to the idea of, do good work and see what happens. And when I began establishing my name, I got introduced to a representative from the American College of Sports Medicine, who put me in touch with the communications director there, who had access to a lot of different media outlets like CNN or NPR or ESPN, and gave me the opportunity to talk to some of them, writing their pieces. And I also developed a relationship with an editor at US News, their health section, and began blogging for them. So none of this was an aspiration. It was really just like my interest and passion in the field, and then noticing the branches and the deviations that arise from developing the trust of people who then share your name with others. And so that's really my approach, is continuing to forge a path of trying to impact people positively and to see what happens. I find it rather irrelevant at times to project what my 5-year goal is, because that could look so different than what my mind is forecasting it to be. It can take so many different versions.
Lastly, what's a motto that you like to live by? Or maybe you don't live by mottos, but maybe it's a saying that you like to reflect on. This is one from Shakespeare. If you want to impress your friends, you start quoting Shakespeare. Another guiding idea that I share with a lot of my athletes, and my favorite quote of his is this: it's that nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. In other words, there's nothing in life that's factually, objectively good, nor is there anything in life that's factually bad. Everything is neutral. Everything is what it is until we affix a positive or negative label to it. Like when I'm driving in congested traffic, in standstill traffic, and I look to my left and there's someone, maniacally honking on their horn, trying to weave in and out of lanes, and I look to my right and I see someone belting out to their favorite Ariana Grande song. That idea is significant, that in response to the same
event, they're two very different interpretations. And I think in any given moment in our life, we can't always control what happens to us, but we can always control the way that we interpret it.
That was awesome. I thought
Yeah.
I would have heard that saying before, but that was a first for me. Well, Greg, that was all so good information. Even like literally a lot of the things that you talked about, I was even thinking like, yeah, these are things that I've noticed helps my clients. Like when you really listen to them, don't always talk and give all your medical information to them. So that was super helpful.
I'm
Thank
glad.
you so much.
And this was so fun. I'm glad that we got a chance to do this. So